The day an HOA letter told me to pave my dirt road or face fines, I laughed, then felt my stomach drop. Because that road was older than the HOA itself, and what happened next exposed a system that counts on rural owners not knowing the law. I bought my property for the quiet, the dust, and the long gravel stretch that reminded me I lived beyond city rules. The road wound through trees, cracked with tire marks, and ended at my gate like a promise of independence. Then the letter arrived, printed on stiff paper, warning that unimproved surfaces violated community standards and must be paved within 60 days. No hearing, no discussion, just a threat. Neighbors whispered that fighting was pointless. The HOA had lawyers, time, and a reputation for grinding people down until they complied. I almost caved, imagining asphalt trucks rolling in, thousands of dollars evaporating, and my land losing its rural character. But one line in the letter bothered me. It claimed county code required paved access roads. That sounded official, confident, and final. Too final. I decided to verify it myself. I drove to the county office the next morning, dust still clinging to my tires, carrying photos of my road like evidence in a trial. The clerk didn't even hesitate. She flipped through zoning maps, pulled up ordinances, and said calmly that gravel roads are explicitly legal for rural residential properties, legal, encouraged even, because they manage runoff better and preserve rural character. She printed the statute, highlighted the section, and slid it across the counter like a winning card. Walking out, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about pavement. It was about power, intimidation, and how easily confidence can replace truth. The HOA had counted on me not checking, not pushing back, not knowing the difference between their rules and the county's authority. As I drove home, the gravel crunched beneath my tires, and for the first time it sounded defiant. Back at the property, I read the HOA letter again, this time with clarity instead of fear. They hadn't cited the county correctly. They'd assumed I would fold. I decided I wouldn't. What followed would test patience, documentation, and resolve, and it would reveal how far an HOA will go when challenged by facts instead of fear. I stood there watching sunlight settle on the stones, realizing this fight would matter to anyone tired of being told rural living must look suburban, that compliance equals harmony, and that questioning authority is trouble. The road waited, unchanged, patient, ready to teach a lesson about rights. I took a breath, folded the paper, and prepared myself for pushback coming soon enough. The HOA didn't respond immediately, which was worse than an argument. Silence is how they let anxiety do the work for them. Weeks passed, and every time a car slowed near my gate, I wondered if it was an inspector, a board member, or a tow truck scouting the road for violations. Then the second letter came, sharper in tone, heavier with consequences. Daily fines, legal action, forced compliance if I failed to act. They still insisted county law required pavement, repeating the lie with more confidence than before. This time, I didn't drive to the county office. I emailed. I asked for written confirmation, citations, and clarification. Within a day, a county zoning officer replied, with a formal letter stating that gravel and dirt roads are fully compliant for rural parcels like mine, with no paving requirement whatsoever. It included ordinance numbers, definitions, and even a sentence explaining that HOAs cannot override county infrastructure standards unless explicitly authorized. Reading it felt like armor locking into place. I forwarded the letter to the HOA board, politely, professionally, and without emotion. I thanked them for their concern and attached the county confirmation, highlighting the relevant sections. I expected the matter to end there. Instead, the response came fast and hostile. They claimed their architectural guidelines superseded county allowances. They warned me not to misinterpret the law. They demanded compliance within 30 days, or escalation would begin. That was when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power play. The HOA wasn't confused. They were betting I'd blink first. I started documenting everything. Dates, letters, emails, threats. I spoke to neighbors quietly and learned I wasn't the first. Others had paved driveways, widened roads, or paid fines simply because they didn't want the fight. No one had pushed back with documentation before. The HOA scheduled a compliance hearing and summoned me to appear. I walked into that room with a folder thick enough to make a statement before I said a word. Board members sat elevated, faces tight, voices rehearsed. They talked about property values, uniformity, and safety. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly and stuck to facts. I cited the county ordinance. I read the zoning letter aloud. I explained that their guidelines could not contradict county law without specific authority, which they lacked. The room shifted. Questions replaced accusations. One board member asked if I planned to pave eventually. I said no. Another asked if I'd consider compromise. I said legality isn't negotiable. The hearing ended without a decision, which meant they hadn't won. Walking out, I felt eyes on my back, not angry now, but uncertain. The gravel road hadn't changed, but the ground under the HOA's confidence had. They'd built their authority on assumption, and assumption cracks fast when challenged by facts. I knew retaliation might come next, but I also knew something important had already happened. They now understood I wasn't afraid of paperwork, patience, or standing alone. Retaliation didn't come as another letter. It came quietly, through inspections, complaints, and sudden interest in details that had never mattered before. A notice about mailbox placement, a warning about roadside vegetation, a reminder to repaint a fence that had stood untouched for years. Each issue was minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern meant to exhaust me into compliance. The road was still the target, even if they pretended otherwise. I didn't react emotionally. I responded methodically. Every notice received a written reply. Every claim met with a citation. Every deadline answered ahead of time. I asked for written policies, enforcement history, and proof of consistent application across the community. That last request slowed them down. Consistency is hard to prove when enforcement is selective. Meanwhile, I kept communication open with the county. I asked follow-up questions, requested clarification on HOA authority limits, and confirmed that no private association could force a road surface change without a safety determination from the county engineer. The county official even offered to attend an HOA meeting if necessary. I didn't take him up on it yet, but knowing I could change the balance. At the next HOA meeting, the tone was different, less forceful, more procedural. They presented a revised interpretation of their guidelines, claiming gravel was discouraged but not prohibited. It was a quiet retreat, disguised as clarification. I raised my hand and asked for that interpretation in writing, along with confirmation that all fines and threats related to my road were rescinded. The room went silent. Eventually, the president said they'd review the matter. Days later, a formal notice arrived stating that enforcement regarding my road was paused pending. Further review, no apology. No admission, just a pause. I knew better than to celebrate early. Pauses can resume, so I kept pushing, not aggressively, but persistently. I requested the enforcement history of road surfacing within the HOA. The records showed something telling. No other rural property had ever been fined for gravel. Mine was the first. That mattered. Selective enforcement isn't just unfair, it's legally weak. I sent another letter, pointing this out, and asked that the HOA confirm in writing that gravel roads are permitted for rural designated lots. This time they took weeks to respond. When they did, the language was careful and final. Gravel roads were permitted where county zoning allows them. My property qualified. Case closed. Standing at the end of my road, I felt relief, but also something sharper. This wasn't just a win for me. It exposed how easily authority overreaches when unchallenged. How many people had paid thousands simply to avoid stress? How many rural properties lost their character because someone with a rulebook wanted uniformity? The gravel still crunched underfoot, unchanged and unbothered. It had outlasted threats, meetings, and paperwork. And as the dust settled, I realized the real victory wasn't keeping my road. It was proving that knowledge, patience, and documentation can stop intimidation cold. Even when it wears a friendly HOA logo, with the road issue officially settled, I thought the story might end quietly. But word travels fast in small communities. Especially when someone pushes back and wins. Neighbors started stopping by. Not to complain about dust or noise, but to ask questions. Some had letters tucked into glove compartments. Others had memories of fines they never understood but paid anyway. My gravel road had become a reference point, proof that the HOA wasn't absolute. One neighbor told me he'd been pressured to widen his driveway to meet emergency access standards, even though the county never required it. Another admitted she paved a perfectly functional gravel lane because she was told it was mandatory. None of them had checked. None of them were shown county code. Fear had been cheaper than resistance, at least in the short term. I shared everything I had. Ordinances, emails, the zoning letter. I explained how calmly asking for citations changed the conversation. How written communication mattered more than heated arguments. Slowly, confidence replaced resignation. People began attending HOA meetings who never had before. Questions multiplied. Motions were challenged. Vague statements were met with, "Can you show us where that's written?" The HOA noticed. Their newsletters shifted tone, suddenly emphasizing cooperation and transparency. New language appeared about respecting county regulations. They even formed a guideline review committee, which was code for damage control. I was invited to join. I declined politely. My point had already been made. What surprised me most was how the county responded once they realized an HOA had been misrepresenting their code. They sent a general clarification notice to several rural HOAs in the area, outlining road standards and explicitly stating that gravel and dirt roads are lawful and protected under rural zoning. It wasn't addressed to me, but I knew exactly why it existed. That single document carried more weight than any argument I'd made alone. Standing on my road one evening, watching a neighbor's truck kick up dust instead of anxiety, I felt something settle. The fight had never been about winning against an HOA. It was about restoring balance. HOAs exist to manage shared spaces, not rewrite law. When they forget that, people lose more than money. They lose confidence in their own rights. The gravel road remained simple, imperfect, and functional. It didn't match suburban ideals, and that was the point. Rural land isn't meant to be polished into uniformity. It's meant to breathe, shift, and reflect the land itself. Asphalt would have silenced that, replaced character with compliance. I realized then that the real lesson wasn't hidden in county code. It was in the willingness to pause, verify, and refuse to be rushed by threats. Authority depends on assumption. The moment you question it calmly, it either proves itself or collapses. In this case, it collapsed quietly, under the weight of its own exaggeration. As the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the stones, I knew this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who's ever been told. That's just how it is, when the law says otherwise. Months later, the road is still gravel, still uneven in places, still mine. But the way I see it has changed. Every rut feels earned. Every stone a reminder that rights don't protect themselves. Since the dispute ended, the HOA has been noticeably cautious. Letters are softer. Threats are rare. When they cite rules now, they attach sources. That alone tells me everything I need to know. Power behaves differently once it's been checked. I still get messages from people outside the neighborhood. Friends of friends. Rural owners in other counties. They all start the same way, with a sentence heavy with frustration. My HOA says I have to, and almost always, the rest of the sentence contradicts county or state law. I never tell them to fight. I tell them to verify. Knowledge is less dramatic than confrontation, but far more effective. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't the fines or the threats of legal action. It was how close I came to complying without question. One signature, one contractor quote, and the road would have been paved forever. The HOA wouldn't have won through law, but through pressure and my own doubt. That's how overreach usually succeeds, quietly, one unchecked demand at a time. The county confirmation still sits in a folder in my office, though I probably won't need it again. What I do need is the habit it taught me. Read carefully. Ask for sources. Separate confidence from authority. HOAs rely on the blur between the two. Counties don't. The law doesn't care how official a letterhead looks. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the property after a rain, watching water settle into the gravel instead of running off in sheets. The road works. It drains properly. It fits the land. And that, ironically, was the county's argument all along. Gravel belongs here. It always did. The HOA just forgot that rural doesn't mean unfinished. It means intentional. If there's one thing this experience reinforced, it's that rural property comes with responsibility, not just freedom. You have to defend its character, because someone will always try to standardize it. Not out of malice, but out of habit. Uniformity is easier to manage than individuality. But easier doesn't make it right. The gravel road didn't change, but I did. I'm less intimidated by official-sounding demands, less rushed by deadlines meant to scare, and more comfortable standing alone when facts are on my side. That's a lesson I'll carry long after the dust settles for good. And every time my tires crunch down that road, I'm reminded that sometimes the simplest surface is the strongest one.